Neil Weaver, and I am CEO of Leaf House Financial. We are an independent third-party fiduciary for retirement plans across the country. We're in all 50 states, and including Puerto Rico. So I wanted to get into the presentation, and I'm going to share my screen. We are here to discuss the differences, and I'm sorry if I'm looking, I have 3 screens. I don't know where I am sometimes. So we're going to talk about 321 versus 338 fiduciary services and other services as well as advisors. So let's go into what we're actually going to talk about, a little bit of overview about Leaf House and what Leaf House does. We're going to talk about the role of your professional, of a financial professional, so an advisor, the benefits of using a third-party investment manager, and then understanding the differences between the two, because it's the same advice, but it's a different liability structure. And we're going to go into that. And then I'm going to give you a checklist. If you're interested in pursuing an investment manager, you can ask these as a sort of a vetting list. Okay, so let's go into this is in general. So let's talk about Leaf House. Just for a little while, Leaf House is the largest, according to Plan Advisor Magazine, we're the largest fiduciary in the country with regards to number of plans. Like I said, we're on, we manage a little over $15 billion. We have a proprietary system that we use called the Leaf House GPA, and we are DALBAR certified. I'll go into why that matters here in a second. DALBAR is sort of the JD Power and Associates of our business. They're an expert in fiduciary services, and so getting them to bless your services is kind of a big deal for the due diligence part of plan sponsor's job, which we'll talk to here in a second. So what I wanted to do is let's discuss the role of the financial professional first. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So you've got, I would say, a lot of headwinds to your business. The first of which is the regulatory environment is changing rapidly. There's the Secure Act, you've got the CARES Act, you've got this ESG stuff they're rolling out through the DOL. You've got all sorts of other cautionary things going on, of the fiduciary rule, or the new one, or the enforcement, or lack of enforcement. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And that is causing a fee compression. I'm sure I don't have to tell you as advisors that. It's harder to charge the same fee as you used to. And so it started with the record keepers, and then it went to other service providers, and it's certainly on the feet of the advisors at the moment. And that makes it very difficult, if you have to cut your fee, to scale your business. So if you have to worry about all these other services and have to charge the same or less fee with higher expenses, it makes it harder to do business. And then lastly, it's how do you differentiate yourself with all this stuff going on? And I know in the past, some advisors have sort of fancied themselves as stock pickers or mutual fund pickers. That's fine, except when somebody comes along with a better mousetrap or a better way to put things, you get fired because their value add is, well, it's been commoditized. I can do just what you can do, and vice versa as a provider. So you have to find some sort of other differentiation to make your business viable going into the future. So what is your responsibility on the plan? Well, they're not that complicated, but the way you do it could be. So right here, we want to increase participation. Obviously, we want to get as many people in the plan as possible. We want to get them to save the most money as possible. And we also want to help with the plan design. And I'm going to go into that here just in a second. The way we accomplish this could be different. And you have so many value adds that are outside of investments. I wanted to kind of expand on this for a second. The first thing you're doing is you're educating the participants and the plan sponsor. So the plan sponsor has duties that they, as was talked about previously on the 316 side, they have duties they don't know they have. And so you become a very integral part in helping to educate them about what they're supposed to do with the plan. Now, some plan sponsors want you to educate their participants, either in person, on a Zoom call, maybe one-on-one, maybe in a group setting. Some of them don't want you to talk to them. It's just depends. And so how you put together an education plan can be a differentiator for you. But I'll tell you what the biggest responsibility that you have here, and it kind of goes in with the plan design, although kind of tangentially, is you have to help guide them to follow the regulations that they may not know they have to follow. So for instance, the biggest one there is the 408B2. We affectionately call it 408BS because of all the things they make the plan sponsor do, but it's really for their benefit. Now, the spirit of the regulation on 408B2 is that the plan sponsor is supposed to gather all of the fees in the plan, and then they're supposed to take that information and certify that those fees are reasonable. Well, that's kind of difficult to do. And a lot of plan sponsors, if you've seen these fee disclosures, are very difficult to interpret. That's where you come in as a value add. Say, well, I can help you do this. I can help you benchmark the plan. I can help you with the reasonableness part of your job, which is very nuanced. And therefore, you can differentiate yourself if you know how to do this. Another thing you're doing is you're helping them oversee all of their vendors. So, for instance, the record keeper or the TPA or an attorney or who knows, or a fiduciary, you're helping oversee them as the noted expert. So your plan sponsor will depend on you even more because you kind of help them understand the role of these other providers. And then, of course, the plan design, what I'll say about that, and let's say you have a restaurant, and let's say there's 100 people at the restaurant that work at the restaurant. And they're all, mostly 21 years old, college kids. They last about 6 months and then they move on somewhere else. But you have an auto enroll feature in your plan. Well, what you end up doing is enrolling all these people, and then 6 months later, they have $12 in their plan, and now your plan is bloated with all these small accounts. And therefore, the fees are going up, and the administration is going up, and your liability is going up. That's where you could come in and say, hey, you know what? You're not doing what you should do here, and let me help you decide. Also, all these record keepers, a lot of the record keepers have different platforms. They might have 4 or 5 different platforms to choose from. Which one is the best? There you go. You can help the plan sponsor kind of figure out or screen what is going to be in their best interest. So all of those things are your responsibility as a financial professional. And really what I would say is that you're more of the general manager of the whole thing. So there's a lot of moving parts on 401k and 403b and 457 plans. And I'm just going to go over them broadly here. Think of yourself as the conductor of the symphony. You've got all these different parts playing a role, and you sort of coordinate all that. There's another value add for you. So you've got the record keeper. You have, and we'll go over this, we have the TPA, and then we obviously have the investment manager, which is the 338 or 321 investment manager. Okay, so what do all these particular entities do? Well, the record keeper record keeps the plan. So they provide your statements. They'll give you the 800 number. They'll give you the website, the platform from which to trade. And these are places like Fidelity, Navoya, Nationwide, Empower, and so forth and so on. Then you have the third-party administrator, which we just talked about in the previous session, and they handle the day-to-day things. They help you with loans. They help you fill out your 5500 tax filing. You can engage them even further in a 316 capacity as the plan sponsor. And that offloads even more liability and responsibility. Now, one of the big ones there is the payment remittances. That's a big deal. Let's say you take people's money out on a Tuesday, and then you went on vacation for a week, and you didn't get to putting the money in the plan until the following Tuesday. Well, that's a liability on you as the plan sponsor. And that's something you can help, you can offload by exploring in 316. We're a big fan of that. Why not blame somebody else? And it's not just an offloading of liability, it's an offloading of work. And that's an important distinction. And then lastly, you've got the investment manager, and you have to figure out which type of fiduciary you want to engage. And I'm going to go into that because there are some investment decisions that are the same depending on which one you choose. However, the liability is not the same. So let me go into that. So the first one here is the QDIA, which is the default. Let's say you have somebody that starts at your firm and they're 25 years old and they don't know what they're doing. And so they don't choose an investment at all. Well, that investment has to go somewhere, and that's the default. Well, there are specific rules around what counts as a default, which investments you can use in a default, and it has to be in the best interest of the participants. And those rules have changed. They haven't changed recently, but they've changed over time. And so what used to qualify doesn't qualify anymore. And keep in mind, you might have 100 people, so you have to select an investment that's appropriate for 100 people, which is a different discussion than having an investment appropriate for one person. And you have to monitor the investments. Well, monitoring the investments is not that easy. You're going to have some system to do that. And keep in mind, a lot of these systems have been commoditized. The typical fee for an investment fiduciary is somewhere between 5 and 10 basis points. So on $1 million plan, that's a $500 fee for the investment fiduciary. Can you monitor the investments and do all the other things that I'm going to talk about for $500 a year on $1 million plan? And the answer might not be yes. If that's the case, this could be something that you should explore. You should explore it from that standpoint, but you should also explore it from a professional liability standpoint. I'll talk about that here in a second too. You're responsible for fund changes. The plan sponsor is, and of course that falls to you as the advisor if you select that role. The problem with that is that sometimes when you ask a record keeper, let's say you identify an investment that is not good anymore, and you tell the record keeper to take it out of the plan. And let's say for whatever reason, they make a mistake, and they do make mistakes. They're human beings just like we are. Whose liability is that? Well, at first it's going to be them because they messed up. But then let's say you don't check it for 2 years and you have a wrong fund in your lineup. Now who's to blame? Well, that's you because you didn't oversee that. So not only do you have to make sure that you make the fund change, you have to make sure they do what you told them to do, which is more time off the plate of either the plan sponsor or you as the investment advisor. And the messed up part there is even though you might not be serving in a fiduciary capacity, you're certainly going to get blamed because the plan sponsor will get blamed and then blame you for not telling them or not overseeing, and then you get fired. So either way, it's not good for you. You obviously have to choose good investments, which is the investment selection part, but it's not as easy as you might think. So if you look at a concept called revenue sharing, this becomes extremely complicated. You know, when I got in the business 25 years ago, and I can't believe I'm that old, actually. My wife tells me I am old, but maybe not as old as she thinks I am. When you select an investment and you use revenue sharing, meaning that you're using A shares, B shares, C shares, Y shares, I mean, what's the difference between an A share and a Y share and a T share and an R6 shares? The difference is how you buy it, which is the price. And so the concept of revenue sharing is very simple to explain, but it's very difficult to do in real life. And here's how it goes. This came out of the 80s when the computers just weren't robust enough to do it for us like they do now. And so what record keepers did is they said, you know, we're going to use a share class that has embedded revenue inside of it over and above the actual cost of the investment. And so what ends up happening is the record keeper collects more revenue than the investment actually costs, and then shares that additional revenue with different entities on the plan to pay for different services. So that's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not illegal or anything like that. The problem is, well, there's really two problems with revenue sharing. Is one, it creates an opaqueness around the fees because the fees are baked in to the actual investments themselves, or some of the fees are baked in. That complicates it even more. So if you're a plan sponsor and you buy an A share or an R2 or something that has some sort of embedded revenue inside of it, it's very difficult to find out, number one, what that revenue is if you're a plan sponsor, and then number two, where does that revenue go? Who's getting that revenue? And as a plan sponsor, you not only have to certify who's getting it, but you have to certify the reasonableness of all these fees. And by using revenue sharing, it's just more difficult to do. Again, you could do it, and people do it all the time. It's just more difficult than the alternative, which is to not do that. And I'll explain what that means here in a second. So that's the first problem. It just creates this opaqueness where it's difficult to find out what the fees are. is I defy a plan sponsor to look at a 150-page disclosure on what their fees are and then decipher what they are and tell you. They depend on you for that. And of course, that's more time that you have to invest in that. So keep in mind, what I'm talking about is the investment is already a good investment. We know it's a good investment. I can certify it's from a qualitative standpoint and a quantitative standpoint, it's good. Now the decision is, how do I buy it? And so this goes to the second point I was making on revenue sharing. Revenue sharing creates an inequity between your participants for services. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is very, very complicated in the fact that you can buy an A share with, let's say, 50 basis points of revenue sharing embedded in it, but you can also buy a C share or a D share or a Y share or a T share with a different amount of revenue sharing. So let's say one fund pays 50 and the other fund pays 25. And let's say you get Vanguard in there, they don't pay revenue sharing at all, and you have zero. So you have some participants paying zero for record keeping or TPA services or what have you. And then you have some people paying 50. That is a liability, again, on the plan sponsor for making that decision. So if I lined up all your participants and I said, some of you are paying 50 basis points and some of you are getting all this for free, that would not be a good conversation to have. And so the complicated part is every one of these platforms that you use from a record keeping standpoint all have a different availability list for mutual funds or for investments. So some may not have access to the A share. You might have to buy the Y share, or you might have to buy the R5 or the R6 or the R2, depending on what platform you're in. So not only do you have to know what investments are available in the platform, which is difficult to get, but you'll have to monitor to make sure those investments don't change the amount of revenue share they're paying. So in this example, let's say I have 15 investments and they're all paying 50 basis points. That's great. But let's say next year, one of the funds in your lineup decides to lower their revenue sharing down to 45. Now, just what happened? Well, you have 14 people paying 50 basis points and you have one investment paying 45. Now you're at the same problem again. And if you multiply that by thousands of choices on all these different record keeping platforms, you can see how difficult this can be. So these investment decisions have to be made by somebody. So you could have them get a good investment, but buy it the wrong way and create a liability for them. So these are things that you've got to address as an advisor on the plan. Say, wow, why am I getting involved in this? Because again, you certainly will get the blame for not telling them about this. The mapping strategy, what is that? Well, you have a certain lineup and then you want to make it into something else. Let's say you want to replace 3 funds. You have to map the money from one place to another. That's an investment liability as well. And then, of course, you have to report on this. You have to pay somebody or get a system which will print out or generate a report so that you can do this over and over and over. So you can see there's a lot of investment decisions to be made here. And because of this, the popularity of fiduciary investments or fiduciaries for retirement plans has exploded in the past few years. 25 years ago when I got in the business, there wasn't that much choice. I had a few record keepers to choose from. I had a few lineups that I could choose from, but most of the time I didn't really have that many choices. But now you have thousands and thousands of choices at hundreds of record keepers. You could really mess this up. And so a lot of people are realizing the benefits of outsourcing this to a third party to do this. The biggest thing as an advisor, and I was previously an advisor for 10 plus years in my early career, the first thing that I think of is scalability. So you can take something that's commoditized with somebody that already has a system and position them as an expert. And by the way, you are coordinating that. You are the person that is in charge of that. So it allows you to repeat the same process over and over and over. And therefore, it becomes much more efficient when you do that. So you can handle many more plans by doing it this way. You're also going to create a value. And here's something that's not often talked about. Places like Leaf House. So we have $15 billion and we've got nearly 6,000 different entities that we service. With that amount of money, a lot of these, we call them DCIO firms or investment companies, will come to us and they'll offer us a share class that is maybe not offered to the general public, or they'll come and say, I'll make a share class just for you, or I'll allow you to use a CIT with a cheaper expense ratio because you have so much money with us, or vice versa. So by tapping into a third-party fiduciary with the clout and leverage of billions and billions of dollars, you might actually get access to share classes you wouldn't otherwise get access to at cheaper costs. So a great example, I'll use the Fidelity target dates. When they first came out, the index target dates, I think it was 14 basis points, and we got them at 8 basis points. So there you're already generating value. If the whole plan was enrolled in those target dates, you could get the share class with us and even add the 5 basis point fee that we would charge on that plan and still be cheaper than getting those investments without a fiduciary. So you can see you're generating value here by either tapping into lower cost share classes. You also have customization that we'll talk about here in a second. And then of course, ESG. We have a system, and many fiduciary managers, at least on the national level, will have a tool that you can tap into just in case somebody asks you for that. And this is happening more and more. There's sustainable funds is not just a buzzword. People are asking for it. I remember the days when we would get one request every 6 months. We're getting requests every day now for ESG, certainly, because it's been in the news and it's something that a lot of people want. So those are the benefits of using an investment manager. So let's discuss the different types of services that you can get. There are 2 types right now. There's a 321 and a 338. What's the difference? Well, the advice is the same, sort of. There's always a catch. One of them is a non-discretionary fiduciary, which is 321, and the other one is a discretionary fiduciary, which is 338. What's the difference? The difference is who's making the final decision. In a 321, it is a sharing of liability. In a 338, it is an offloading of most liability, not all. And I'll go into that in a second. So back to the 321, some people call it a co-fiduciary. What the plan sponsor is doing is if you serve or somebody serves as a 321, they're bringing you into their problem. And then when you get in court, you guys try to blame each other. That's essentially how it's working. With a 338, it doesn't work that way. It's an offloading of liability, but it's also an offloading of work. And I'll explain what that means in a second. So think of 321 like this. Let's say you're in court. Let's hope you don't ever have to do this, but let's say you're in court and you're talking to a judge, and then your attorney leans over and whispers something to you and covers the microphone. That's sort of a 321. So the 321 is they're giving you advice, and if you follow that advice, they'll continue to be your attorney and stand behind you. But if you don't take their advice, then they'll step away and say, I'm not responsible for whatever decision you just made. So I'm going to lead you down a logic tree here on 321 versus 338. So if you hire a 321 investment fiduciary, when would you not take their advice? Because if you don't take their advice, then you don't get the coverage, which is the reason why you hired them in the first place. So if that's the case, and the fact that you're always going to take their advice, then why wouldn't you hire them as a 338 for the same advice, but make them do the work and then blame them? That's the difference between the two. Now, some advisors would say, well, wait a minute, if I outsource the investments to a 321 or 338, what do I do? And then my response is everything else. Literally everything else falls to you, which is a massive amount of work. So the education of the participants, the education of the plan sponsor, the overseeing of their disclosure and compliance requirements, the 408B2, the reasonableness tests that you have to do, coordinating all their service providers, being a liaison between the plan and the record keeper, helping them with financial wellness or helping them with plan design. All of those things have nothing to do with advisors, with investments, but are hugely valuable. And especially when the investments have been commoditized like this, you're really not standing out by saying, well, I do the investments. Because, okay, well, so does everybody else for 5 basis points, right? There's not a whole lot of value there. So 321 versus 338 really comes down to how much liability you're offloading and how much work you're offloading. So let's discuss that. In a 321 scenario, you are offloading some work and some liability. It's a moderate liability. If you follow the advice, they will stand behind you. But there are a lot of holes in that, and you just have to be aware of that. What are they standing behind? They're standing behind the quality of the investment. Okay, that in fact, this investment is good enough to be in your plan. What are they not standing behind? They're not standing behind how you chose to buy it. So if you chose an A share when you should have chosen R6, they're not standing behind that. That's your decision on how you want to pay for services in the plan. Why wouldn't you just buy a zero revenue share fund with no embedded revenue and then just have everybody charge the fee to the participants? It's the same thing they're doing now. They're taking money out of the participants' plan or account now. The only difference is that they actually see the charge if you do it without revenue sharing, which we would argue is something that you need to do anyway, because then it becomes like, well, what are you hiding? So they're not offloading that liability of you picking the right share class. They're not offloading the liability that you're picking the right platform. They're not offloading the liability that you're picking from an investment standpoint, the right trade. So for instance, if you swap out fund A for fund B and the record keeper doesn't make that, maybe they fat finger it and they put another investment in there that you didn't intend, who gets blamed for that? Not the fiduciary, not in the 321, because they didn't initiate those trades. They didn't make the decision for that. You did as the plan sponsor. So there's a lot of stuff that's not covered on the 321. And again, we're fans of 321. We've got a lot of business in 321. But when you compare it to if you're looking for an offloading of liability, or at least some of the liability, the only way to actually get rid of it or abdicate the liability would be on the 338 side. Okay, so we've talked about the 321 as a non-discretionary. You're making the decision as the plan sponsor to buy and sell, and all you're doing is you're getting a vetted list of investments that pass qualitatively or quantitatively. But all the other stuff, the actual initiation of the trades, making sure the record keepers did what they were supposed to, the disclosures, all that you're still on the hook for, which is where a lot of the liability is. There was a lawsuit recently, and I won't name the record keeper or the investment firm, but there was 9 ways that the plan sponsor could have bought the same fund. I mean, like an A share, B share, T share, Y share, all that. And they chose the second lowest cost, not the first lowest. Well, somebody figured that out, and the difference was 2 basis points. They could have bought it 2 basis points cheaper than they did. And they got sued over it because they went back for 7 years and they had thousands of participants. That adds up over time. So this is an example of the plan sponsor not trying to do what's in their best interest, but just didn't have the knowledge or just didn't do it correctly. All of this you can, or most of it, you can offload to a third party using 338. So what are we not offloading? So we've talked about what you're getting on both 321 and 338. What are you not offloading? There's one thing that a 338 cannot offload, and that is the duty for you to monitor the process, to oversee the 338. Obviously, I can't monitor myself in a screening process. That would be a conflict of interest. So that is something that it can never be offloaded. And yes, you're offloading the rest of the investment liability, but you're not offloading that. That goes back to what I was saying in my first, or one of my first slides, which is the DALBAR certification. So the plan sponsor, the Department of Labor, does not want the plan sponsor to hire a fiduciary or any vendor for that matter, and then never oversee them. So what they'll do is and by the way, having a 338 or 321 does not preclude you from getting sued. It doesn't. All it does is provide protection when you do get sued. So you'll still be named, and let's say you're using 338, you'll be named in the lawsuit, or the plan sponsor will, maybe the advisor will too. And they'll go to the judge, or the DOL will go to your client and say, okay, well, how did you make these decisions? And then they will say, I am exercising section 338 of ERISA code, and I'm blaming them, which is the third party. To that, the judge or the DOL will say, okay, let me see your oversight. How do you know these people are legitimate? How do you know that they did what they were supposed to do? And that falls on the plan sponsor, and that can never be taken away. So this is a very simple exercise that if you do this, and you can help being the advisor, if you do this, you will insulate your plan sponsor and actually abdicate the rest of their fiduciary liability with regards to investments. Did the investment fiduciary, let's just use Leaf House as an example. Did Leaf House do an investment policy statement? Yes, I have it in my file. It's an online version. I can see it. Did Leaf House monitor the fund lineup? Yeah, I've got the quarterly reports in my file. Check. You check the box that you looked at the reports. Did Leaf House make the trades? Did they swap out funds they said were bad to some that were good, or that they determined were good? Yes, I have the transaction reports, and I have the old statement and the new statement, which shows the fund did in fact get changed. That's an easy exercise to do. This is what we had 3 months ago. This is what we have now. It matches to what Leaf House said they were going to do. You notice I didn't say, is the report that Leaf House gives you any good? Is the investment policy statement any good? That is irrelevant. The Department of Labor does not expect a plan sponsor to be able to discern whether or not this is good or not. That's not what they're there for. They're there to say that it exists. When we get it on our side of the in this particular case, the lawsuit or the legal proceeding, they will ask us about the quality of the investment policy statement, but not the plan sponsor. All they're doing is saying that it exists. And this goes back to what I was saying about DALBAR. So DALBAR certifies us. I think we're the only national fiduciary that does it, or at least we used to. There might be others now. But DALBAR is an industry expert, and they certify that hiring and retaining Leaf House is a prudent fiduciary decision. That's a big piece of the due diligence that you stick in your file. So when the judge asks you, how did you know that Leaf House was any good? Because, well, we really didn't. We thought we liked them, but an industry experts think they're pretty good. And that's what it's for. You get the DALBAR certification to say, well, somebody that knows what they're doing said they were legitimate. And that is what you need from a due diligence standpoint, either as an advisor or a plan sponsor. So I hope that makes sense. There are other certifications you can get, like the CFAX, which we're fans of. We got DALBAR because it specifically acts as a 338 fiduciary only. So the only people that could get that certification actually do 338. So I want to move on and discuss how are you going to actually select the third party if you choose to go that way. Well, you have to make a few decisions. The first decision is, which one do we want to hire, a 338 or a 321? Okay, so that's the first decision. Some plans have this notion they want to maintain control. And again, that's sort of interesting to me because they hire the 338 or 321. You have total control. If you don't like what your fiduciary is doing, you get rid of them. And they're very keen to pick that up, to understand. So I know that my clients need to have a service that they value from me, or I get fired. So the thinking that you're not in control there is sort of weird to me, because they hired you. They hired the 338 that could fire them. They have total control. Regarding whether or not it's 321 or 338, it's the same thing. I am the plan sponsor on the Leaf House 401k plan. And what I do is I offload everything. 316, I offload 338 because I don't want to be blamed. I want to do the blaming. So it's an offloading of work and it's an offloading of liability, which I entertain very much. So let's go through some other questions. Is the provision of investment management services, number 2, the primary focus of the business? Well, this is very interesting too. So if you go to a place that has 98% of their business in some other version, let's say they're banking or they have insurance or something, and they only spend 2% of their time on fiduciary services, by definition, they don't focus there. And if they don't focus there, they're not going to be as good potentially as people who do focus there. Not all the time, but I'll give you a good example. My father taught English for 35 years. Well, I speak English, right? I could probably teach English, but I wouldn't be as good as him because that's all he does for a living. So my point here is, if it were me, I would tend to focus on firms that specialize in investment fiduciary management, at least for more than half of their business. They've got 90% of their business someplace else. How much focus do they have on the fiduciary side? That's just my 2 cents. Number 3, can the plan sponsors move their plan and still keep their fiduciary? That one is a big one to me. The way a lot of these fiduciaries work, at least the national fiduciaries, is they get institutional agreements with the record keepers. And so let's say, for instance, your plan is at record keeper A, where they have an agreement, but then you want to move the plan 3 years later to record keeper B. If they don't have an institutional agreement, you have to fire them and then hire someone else. Well, guess what? They're all going to have a different take on fiduciary services, and they're probably going to force you into a lineup that they made that may not look like your lineup. So now you're going to have to sell all your investments just because you move the plan. Some fiduciaries have that problem because they're institutionally focused. Leaf House and a few others, we don't operate that way. We operate as a bolt-on to the plan. So we could go anywhere. I think we're on 95 different record-keeping platforms right now. So, I mean, that's pretty much everybody that's relevant in the 401k industry. And I think that's important because if you go from record keeper A to record keeper B, you don't have to lose the fiduciary. And chances are your plan lineup doesn't have to change either, which is really, really helpful. I'll skip the number 4 and go to number 5. I think this is probably the biggest one. Does your investment manager have the ability to create custom specific lineups? Why is this important? Well, all of your plans that you oversee as an advisor are different. And I'll make the comparison. Would you design IBM's plan the same as you would design Pizza Hut? I don't think you would, because the clientele and the demographics are completely different. The people who work at IBM are very different than the people who work at Pizza Hut. Therefore, your plan should reflect that. So we do business, like I said, all across the country, and you'll be amazed that different parts of the country value different things in the lineup. So if, let's say in the Northeast, they might value price more. Let's say in the Midwest, they might value active management or active funds more. Maybe on the West Coast, they value sustainability more. And I'm just making this up as I go. The issue there is most fiduciaries have a predefined list that you can choose from per platform. Let's say you have record keeper A and they have 2 platforms. The fiduciary will come and make a lineup for each platform. Okay, well, what does that do? It forces you into one of those 2 lineups that they pre-made. Therefore, you and everybody else in the country that's on this record keeper platform have one of these 2 lineups. Well, what if you have good investments already? Let's say you've got some American funds or Vanguard or BlackRock or some quality investment that you can prove is quality. And then you hire this fiduciary and none of those investments that you have are on their prefab menu. Then what happens? They end up having to sell all your investments. Well, that doesn't make you look good. And you don't need to do that. If those funds are good and we can prove they're good, then why are we selling them, right? That's the question that you should ask. So I think that's a very big one. Leaf House, we can do both. Yes, we can come up with static lineups that you can use, but we can also create a lineup just for you because we have the technology to do it. So we literally have the technology to have a different lineup on every single plan, which is pretty atypical in the industry. That's why we're known as a flex fiduciary that kind of pioneered that. Okay, let me go to the next page and I'll focus on a couple of these. It'd be nice if they didn't have any pending litigation. That would be nice. Sometimes it's kind of unavoidable. Now I'll knock on wood, we don't have any. And then number 10 there, do they maintain an ERISA bond and adequate errors and omissions insurance? I had no idea that this was answered by peers in the industry this the way I'm going to frame it to you. So, we self-insure. Like, wow, that makes me feel very comfortable. So you're just going to write a check if you get sued. You have no insurance whatsoever. I don't like that. I like to, other than worrying about my wife and kids, the only other thing I worry about all the time is liability. We're in the liability business. So we have a massive insurance policy for errors and omissions. Sometimes you just mess up. How many firms have millions of dollars lying around just waiting for somebody to sue them? I mean, I guess huge firms, Apple may have that or whatever, but most of the firms that you're dealing with here, they don't have that. None of your clients have $10 million in a bank account just waiting to get sued. So why would your fiduciary? They're trying to keep you as safe as possible. So we have E&O insurance, we have D&O insurance, I've got a cyber policy, and I've got an ERISA fidelity bond on top of that. I think if you're going down the I'm self-insured route, it makes me nervous. Why wouldn't you want to insure that? Your whole business is liability. Anyway, and then lastly is, do they have any certifications? Doesn't have to be DALBAR. It could be something else. It could be CFEX. All that shows is that they cared enough to show a third party what they were doing. So in the case of DALBAR, they do an annual certification. And I joke with my employees. I say, I feel like I'm always getting certified because it takes 4 to 6 months to do that. So half the year, I'm getting certified all the time, every year. So the DALBAR does things like certify your contracts. They'll look at your ethics statements. They'll look at your procedures. One year, they called all of our clients, which was amazing. And so to get this annual certification says that you're a legitimate operation, that the hiring and keeping of you is a prudent fiduciary decision, and that protects the plan sponsor when they get scrutinized for the one thing that we're not offloading, which is the liability to oversee the plan. So I think that's a huge, huge thing. When you look at investment managers, have a checklist. These are just some of the things that I would ask if I were exploring this. 338, 321, most 338s charge, like I said, between 5 and 10 basis points on the plan. And a 321 is usually between 1 and 2 basis points. Why is that? Well, like I went over, they don't do as much. They don't do as much work, and therefore it's not as much upfront. But we're talking about 3 basis points here. 3. It's not 30. So it's well worth your time from a scalability standpoint. I think it's well worth your time to make you look like the coordinator. And every time that you get your plan sponsor in front of somebody that's knowledgeable and knows what they're doing, you look good. It's like, wow, you brought these people in and you're overseeing them and they're doing a great job. I have you to thank for that. So this all goes back to the value prop for the advisor is hiring or outsourcing this, whether it be administration or investment management, makes you look good so you can focus on all the other things that you have to do. And that way you're not pigeonholed. Talk about differentiator. You brought in all these people, we call it the dream team. You bring in all these people to help with the plan, but the person that everybody talks to is you as the coordinator, as the investment manager. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank you for your time, and I wanted to open it up if anybody had some questions. I know that previous to the presentation here, I did get one question that I hope I addressed, but I want to make sure I address it again. If you're hiring a 321 or a 338, can you hire, let's say the advisor is a 321, can you have a 338 and a 321 on the same plan? And the answer is yes. You can have 100 if you want to. Now you wouldn't want to, but you could. So you could be the 321 as the advisor and then outsource to 338. Or you could be a non-fiduciary and hire a 321 or hire a 338 or both. And we can go into why you would want to do that. But suffice to say, getting into the fiduciary pool is a smart decision. So I don't see any other questions. So what I'll do is I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, I've got one for you.
Yeah.
So this is John. So from a percentage standpoint, you mentioned that Leaf House does have 321. What would you say the split is from 338 to 321? Because I mean, I have this conversation a lot, and plan sponsors are like, which one do I want? And I will curl back and I'll let the advisor answer the question. But I'm just curious from your side of the table, what's the breakdown?
That's a great question. So we are 98.2. So 2% 321, 98% 338. And the reason is because when people know that we're going to give them input on the construction of the lineup, that's why I had, we talked about that question number 5. Can you do a custom lineup? I want to do a custom lineup because every plan is different. So we take the suitability conversation in ERISA very seriously, the know your client provision. So the best way to know your client, and I don't know the participants, I don't know most of the plan sponsors, but the advisors do, but the record keepers know them. And so if they tell me, hey, this plan values price, or this plan wants active management, or this plan wants ESG, I can do that. And that's why I say, wait a minute, I get input on the design of the lineup, but you do all the work and get all the blame. Yes, that's the difference, right? Yeah. So we're not opposed to 321. We do it, but when people figure out that our 338 acts like a 321 in that sense, but they still get the coverage, very few people choose it. Not everybody has that, and so we kind of have a leg up there. I would say on most firms, it's kind of the opposite. Most of them are 321, and 338 is a small portion for the reasons I talked about, because they make these lineups that are static that you can't change. And people don't want that. They want customization.
And what'd you say the spread was? 3 to 4 bips addition? Yeah,
it's usually 5 basis points for 338 and 2 basis points for 321. But like I said, the odds are I'm going to be able to go in there and use some of the same investments that you're using, but get them into cheaper share class to cover the difference of that 3 basis points. Not all the time, but a lot of times, yeah.
Coverage and a cost reduction. It's not bad.